Hello and welcome to the WST Level 3 podcast. My name's Chris Scott and we've put these podcasts together to help our students and other students pass the WST Level 3 exam. One of the things we do is we have a large amount of tasting support products that will help most students pass the tasting exam, as well as our exam questions. Our tasting support includes feedback on your tasting note, mock tasting exams, tasting masterclasses followed by tasting exam resets, as well as a guide that accompanies our audio guide to the WST SAT. Do consider our exam questions as well. We've got over 500 questions and a mixture of multi-choice and long answer exam style questions. Before we get into the interview about Colchagua, I just want to lay out the general regions of Chile. The way to think about it is there are four key zones or regions, if you like, and the way to remember them is CACs. That is Coquimbo at the top, Aconcagua, Central Valley, and then Southern, CACS or CACs. When we talk about Central Valley, what we're talking about is a region that's between a coastal range of mountains and the Andes. You want to think of it as a sort of double lump. You have the Pacific Ocean, and it rises up a set of hills called the coastal range, drops into Central Valley, and then rises steeply up into the Andes. Central Valley is the main breadbasket, if you like, for Chilean wine. It produces the most grapes, and it's got a number of different subregions. One of them is Rapel Valley. Now, Rapel Valley is divided up into two parts, Colchagua and Cachapol. Now, Colchagua and Cachapol, one of them is by the Andes, and one of them is got some coastal influence. The way to remember it is that CO for Colchagua is COO for ocean, and Cachapol, A for Andes. And that's the way I remember it. So Colchagua is the ocean influence, Cachapol is the Andes influence. Hi, my name's Christopher Scott, and I'm here with Nicolas Jarpa from La Playa in Chile. You're the export manager. How are you, Nicolas?
Fine, thank you, Chris.
Excellent. We're going to be talking a wee bit about Colchagua. For the rest of the listeners, I've been mispronouncing that, as usual, as Colchagua.
Yeah, fairly good, anyway.
Yeah. Is Colchagua the official Chilean pronunciation?
Yes, it's about so. It's very easy for us, but I understand that there are slight variations, but it's quite well Colchagua.
Colchagua. Okay, I've almost got it sorted, I think, that
Yeah.
one. But do you want to just give us a quick overview of La Playa?
Well, La Playa is a rather young winery. It's part of the Chilean wine boom that started in the 90s. And it's a very interesting project that has been quite successful, especially in the United States and in the UK and Denmark.
It's a Napa Valley family, isn't it, with some locals?
La Playa is born after a joint venture between a Danish family that established in California, which is the Axelson family, and two other Chilean families. One is the Sutil family, which is linked to different agricultural entrepreneurships, and Maximiano Rasuris, which is, by the way, not related to the Rasuris family, but he was also involved in the wine business many years ago, even before the Chilean wine exports took off.
Okay, and you've got quite a large vineyard, 597 acres. Well, that's what your website says, anyway.
Hectares, yeah.
Is it hectares?
Hectares,
Okay,
yeah.
Look, this is straight off your website. 597 acres.
We need to correct that. It's hectares. Main thing is that we started as grape growers, and then we moved forward into producing wines and then export and marketing wines around the world. Therefore, our strength is set in the vineyards, in the work we can do in the vineyards and control all the stages of winemaking from the vine until we finally release the bottles.
Yeah.
And that's quite unusual for a Chilean winery our size.
Really? Is there a lot of contract growing?
There's a lot of contract growing. The best you could bet for is for a long-term contract, but also there are a lot of wineries making spot purchases.
Yeah.
And usually you have diverging interests because growers want to reduce their costs and want to increase their yields, and as a winemaker you want lower yields and a lot of dedication and efforts behind the grape growing.
Yeah, if you're in a contract market, it's very hard to necessarily get that.
Yeah.
The Aussies have done a lot of work on trying to assess fruit quality for bulk sales, in terms of trying to work out the quality of it. How do you guys try and work out, obviously not your winery, but in general, is there any particular way of trying to determine whether someone who's a contract grower is supplying good grapes, or is it just you have to keep an eye on them?
No, there are good contract grapes. Actually, we also sell grapes to other wineries. Fair enough, you can tell that 80% regarding how the vineyards are established and the location where they are at. And starting from that, usually you cannot get away with really high yields if you have a single curtain, high-density vineyards. You can really have some good rough idea about the quality of the grapes.
Just by looking at the trellising?
The trellising, the setup of the vineyards, and also that doesn't mean that growers won't do a good job. Maybe not as good as what you want, but there's always that conflict, that discussion. Maybe some green harvest, maybe more work in the foliage to enhance the distribution of sunlight. And those sorts of practices are sometimes not easy to convey with the grape growers.
Sure. Okay. Let's talk a bit about Colchagua. Do you want to tell us a bit about where the region is and how it relates to the Andes and maybe the coast?
Colchagua Valley, it's in the southern central part of Chile. It's about 200 kilometers to the south of Santiago. It's quite a big wine region. Mm-hmm. I believe that's part of the processes in which, as a country, we need to better tune the wine areas, because Colchagua involves a series of different conditions. Mm-hmm. But in the overall, Colchagua has warm yet quite mild temperatures during the ripening season. It has rather rich soils. But
is that just from runoff from the Andes and all the silts and all that from the Andes?
Yes, but most of the vineyards in Colchagua are in an intermediate region between the Cordillera de los Andes and a coastal range, mm-hmm. which is called Cordillera de la Costa.
Just to get an idea of the profile, because you have the coast and then you have a wee hill going up and then it drops down into the valleys, right. And then you climb quite heavily into the Andes. Is that right?
That's right. And the Colchagua Valley, most of the vineyards are in the intermediate valley, which accumulates soils and nutrients from several years ago from the Cordillera de los Andes. And also within one part of Colchagua, 100,000 years ago, so it was actually a lake.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the soils are quite special. They are clay, limes.
Lime, yep. Yeah. Is that from marine fossils from the lake?
The part of the lake is just an area within Colchagua, but in the overall, it's part of the type of soils you find in the Chilean central area, which are rather rich compared to the soils you have, for instance, in continental Europe, which mm-hmm. have been strongly exploited and developed. The soils in Chile are rather young. Mm-hmm. And within this vast area, the general conditions allow to produce very good red wines, and in particularly Carmener, Syrah. The latest varietal for which we have really high hopes is Malbec, though Chile is not well known for Malbec.
No, and what do the Argentinians say about that?
Yeah. Well, in Chile there used to be a lot of Malbec, I don't know, in the 50s.
Yeah.
But under the name of Côte, which is the name that they use in France.
Yep.
And after the 50s, there was a strong government initiative to reduce the amount of vineyards. And within that process, the Côte, a.k.a. Malbec, was disappeared and was reduced severely. I am very aware that Argentina has made a name for Malbec, and they have very nice Malbecs. But as a point of difference, in Chile, we are able to have more elegant, more complex Malbecs than what they have in Argentina. Within what we have in Colchagua and also what we see in some of our neighbors, there's a really, really great potential for Malbec, high-quality Malbec.
Okay, I didn't try any Malbecs, and I didn't see any Malbecs on your list. I was at a tasting that you were at yesterday, and I tried a few of your wines, but I didn't see any Malbecs. Are you producing any?
We have Malbec. We're not bottling it yet. Mainly it's a commercial decision. It's not really that easy. But our next step is work Malbec and release our first Malbec as a top-end wine rather than push it in between our regular range. Because we really trust the quality we can get from there. So this next harvest, we will have a very special project for a small volume, a small lot of high-quality Malbec.
Okay. And do you find, if you've got particularly fertile soils, the vegetative growth on your vines must be insane?
They tend to express a little bit more, especially in the early stages of the setting of the vineyards. But with good vineyard management, you're able to have a good balance. The first thing that you need to be in awareness of is that you can't go against nature. So as much as we try to control yields, we're not really pushing yields under levels in which the plant would unbalance, because that's what would lead to a very vigorous growth of the foliage.
Yeah. I suppose if it hasn't got any grapes to ripen, it stores that energy for the next year, and then it just goes, yahoo!
Yeah. And in our particular case, our vineyards are already, in an average, about 16 years old. And at this point, actually, we've seen a reduction of the yields and of the vigor that's very obvious. And that's a good call for us in terms that we see that we're getting a good balance, and we have more and more expectations on the potential quality we can have.
How do you find quality changes as the vines get older? People always say, yields drop and therefore the roots are deeper and quality goes up, but I'm not necessarily a big believer in that. So how do you find the quality changes?
I believe it's all about balance. And what usually happens is that on the early stages, when you have the vineyards, they are not balanced because they are at the same time doing a couple of processes. One is probably setting up as a plant, and the second is producing grapes, and probably the third is also what you have as part of each year's season's growth, because you need to establish the vine for the longer term. You need to conduct the vine, and also you have to deal with the year-to-year development of the shoots, etc. And we had also very pleasant examples of good quality starting the first harvest, and that's only the third year after the plantation.
A lot of people talk about a fruit burst, fruit bomb when a vine first produces its fruit. It's normally sometimes the best fruit that the vine will ever produce because it hasn't done anything for 3 years.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's one of the stages in which the plants are quite vigorous. So especially with high bigger varietals such as Sauvignon Blanc, Syrah, you need to keep an eye on that. We need to understand that grapes, from an evolution perspective, it's part of what the plants do to reproduce. That's what their coding is about. Usually when you have very healthy, high-paced growing plants, they don't have the message to really focus on producing grapes and perpetuating the species. But when you have a good balance, and actually in some conditions, when the plants are under stress, they concentrate on the fruit. And that's something also that's related to management, and you can have that at different stages, not necessarily when they're young or when they're old.
You talked about stress, and one of the things that vines often get stressed is water.
Yeah.
And the Australians do quite an interesting job in terms of stressing their vines with water, because obviously water's at a premium anyway, so it's a nice way of stressing them. Obviously where you guys are, there's probably a fair old amount of water coming down. Do you restrict the water access to the vines?
Yeah. In Chile, it's absolutely necessary to irrigate. because we have this very dry, long growing season, and therefore if we don't irrigate, the plants just wouldn't make it. And that's quite good because that allows us to control the amount of water that the plants receive. And that's one of the points where contract growers have a point of difference between a wine grower. Grape growers usually try to water a little bit more to increase yields, and wine growers, we try to get yields on a healthy level. In Chile, there was a common practice to water stress the plants. What I've seen in different vineyards is that it was overdone. Grapes actually started to shrivel. There was a high concentration of sugar. And nowadays, the trend is to have somewhat of a stress, but not really hard on the plants, basically because we want to have fresher fruit, also because we're looking after lower alcohol levels.
I think we'll wrap it up there, Nicolas. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Cheers.